Hi, we're going to continue discussing research designs using positive psychology as a theme. In our last screencast, we introduced research basics. In this screencast, we will talk about experimental research, and in the next one, we'll talk about non-experimental research, including correlation. And just as a note before we get started, in each of these screencasts related to research designs, I refer to a video called All About Happiness. That's a documentary that is linked in the resource folder for research designs. And oftentimes I will show short video clips within the screencast itself. But for these lessons on research designs, I'm going to have you connect separately just so I could use the time better for talking about these complicated concepts. Okay? Also note that I will list in a moment some happiness activities that have been studied, and I just want you to know that you can find full instructions for those activities and many more through the Greater Good in Action website through UC Berkeley. Okay, I want you to take a moment to reflect. What do you think contributes to your happiness level? Do you think you can purposely change your happiness level, and in what ways? So pause, take a moment to reflect, and then when you're ready to begin, press play. Okay, there are a variety of factors that might influence happiness levels. And many of these factors are talked about in the video clip I referred to. So the first 7 minutes of that documentary correspond to the lesson on research design basics. The next segment, the next 7 minutes or so, is what I'm referring to here. And just as a little update since the making of this video, the simple pie chart that they show in the film, they refer to it as the sustainable happiness model. That's actually been replaced by a more updated and nuanced set of models. And we know now that in order for these intentional activities to work well, a person needs to invest intention and motivation and effort. So simply doing them isn't necessarily the best way to get the effects. There does need to be some buy-in by the person who's doing it. But that said, there are a wide range of activities that have been studied and show really promising results. So they talk about everything from cultivating optimism in relationships to gratitude, forgiveness, meditation. They mention a whole bunch of different things. And one of the challenges in getting any of these activities to work is something called the hedonic treadmill. So think about going on a treadmill at the gym. You take a step forward, and then you go back to where you came from. You take a step forward, and you can walk all day long, and you go nowhere. Hedonic means emotional. So imagine you take a step forward in happiness. The idea is we have a tendency to go back to where we started, and that's called adaptation. Okay, so one of the challenges for researchers is figuring out not only how do you help boost happiness, but how do you help keep that boost going strong for the long term. Okay, so how do we know that these activities work? Well, we need something called an experiment. And a true experiment involves a researcher who manipulates one or more causes and then measures one or more effects. And we give names to these causes and effects. The cause is called an independent variable, and an effect is called a dependent variable. Okay? So in other words, a researcher manipulates one or more independent variables, then measures one or more dependent variables. And in creating that independent variable, it involves creating different groups to compare. So there's random assignment to those groups. Then those groups are treated differently on this independent variable, and then those groups can be compared on the outcome. This will make more sense in context when I walk you through a study. Now, while the researcher is manipulating an independent variable, they're trying to hold as many other variables constant as they possibly can. That will give them a clearer view of what the independent variable is doing. Okay? A strength of true experiments is that you can study cause and effect. All other designs are non-experimental. Only a true experiment allows you to confidently study cause and effect relationships. But a limitation of true experiments is that some variables can't or shouldn't be manipulated. Like if I'm a researcher and you're my participant, I can't randomly assign you to a particular gender identity or age or ethnicity or income or any number of things. So those variables just can't be true independent variables. Likewise, some variables shouldn't be manipulated. We will talk more about ethics later, but the goal of research ethics is you don't cause people harm. And so, for example, if you're interested in studying the effects of trauma on children's memories, you cannot cause trauma to see what it does to children's memories. You have to find other ways to study that issue that don't purposely hurt children to see what happens. Okay? So some variables can't or shouldn't be manipulated. And with true experiments, the more controlled you get, the less the results are inclined to generalize to the real world. So that can be a challenge as well. And then there's some confounds and biases that are talked about in your reading. But what I would like to do is walk through an example to illustrate some of these points. And I'm going to use an example by a researcher shown in that video clip, Sonia Lubomirsky. And here's the reference for that study. The sustainable happiness model suggests that there are 3 contributors to happiness levels: genes, life circumstances, and intentional activities. Based on this model, Lubomirsky and her colleagues predicted that committing random acts of kindness, which is a specific intentional activity, would increase happiness in adults. In other words, the basic model suggests that intentional activities matter, and so they're testing the effects of a specific intentional activity. Participants included 84 college students. So just a quick review from the last discussion that we had. So look at these bullet points. Which one do you think is the theory? Okay, it's the bullet point that refers to the sustainable happiness model. Okay, so sometimes theories are referred to as a theory, like the word theory is actually in the name. Sometimes the word model is used. Sometimes there's not a clue like that, but if you do see a clue, use it. Okay, so the sustainable happiness model is the theory for this study. And then the next bullet point is the hypothesis. It is specific, it is testable, and it is in the form of a statement, predicting that committing random acts of kindness would increase happiness in adults. The population is adults. It says that in the third bullet point. The sample includes 84 college students. So, yes, this is a weird sample. College students are one segment of the larger adult population, but most people don't go to college, right? And most people aren't within a narrow range of ages. Adulthood is much broader. So it's important to keep in mind that there could be limitations preventing extending these results to all parts of the adult population. So here's what they did. All of the participants were randomly assigned to one of 3 kindness groups. All groups participated for 6 weeks, and both kindness groups did 5 acts total. So one group did not do any random acts of kindness on purpose. One group did 5 random acts of kindness, but they did them all in 1 day per week. And then in the last group, they did 5 acts per week, but they were spread out over the week. Before and after the study, all participants completed measures of well-being, including the subjective happiness scale. So the independent variable is going to be the frequency of kind acts. That is what is being manipulated and varied. So when you're looking for an independent variable, you want to look for the groups and then figure out what is being varied among these groups. In this case, it's the frequency of kindness. That is the cause. The independent variable is the cause. And we give groups special names. Experimental groups are groups that get the treatment of interest. Control groups are groups that provide a baseline for comparison. So if you look at these 3 groups, is there one that you think might be a control group? Okay, it's that first one, no kind acts purposely done. They provide a baseline. The other 2 groups are doing kindness. Those are experimental groups. Okay, those are the treatment conditions, so to speak. And then the not doing any kind acts, that is the control, the baseline. Control groups are important, as I said, because you need a baseline so you can make sense of what those other groups are doing. Like, what would people do just naturally on their own without the treatment conditions? This is a between participants manipulation of the independent variable. So a between participant manipulation means that every person is in only one of the groups. So they only get one treatment condition, and you're comparing between these different groups. Within participants would mean that every person being studied did all of the treatments, just in a random order. This is not that. This is between participants. You're comparing different groups. Random assignment to those groups is very important because if you let people choose their groups, there's going to be bias. Even if you let the researchers find a good fit, there's going to be bias. So in this example, suppose you brought in participants and you said, you have a choice. You can either be kind for the next 6 weeks, and there's 2 ways to do that, or just live your normal life. Well, the people who are going to choose the kindness groups are going to be pretty different, probably, in terms of personality compared to the people who are just like, this is stupid, I'm doing it for the course credit, just let me be in the control group, right? The results would be meaningless. But if you randomly put people in groups, everybody has an equal chance to be in any of those groups. So that helps you eliminate the possible effects of personality and other factors that can't be directly controlled. Now, the dependent variables, those are the effects. In this case, the dependent variable is level of well-being, operationally defined using the subjective happiness scale. Remember, an operational definition is just how do you measure your variable? And then potential problems or confounds that are being held constant by researchers include these. Everybody has 6 weeks. Because what if doing kindness for longer had a bigger effect? You know, so everybody has the same amount of time, and of the people who did kindness, everybody does 5 acts total. So maybe it's the case that doing more acts leads to better well-being. Well, they're controlling that, so you cannot explain the results based on that. So you control as many variables as you can so you can get a clearer view of the actual effects of the independent variable that you're studying. Now, here are the results. what they found was that random acts of kindness is consistent, or did lead to greater well-being, but only when done in a single day, clustered together week after week, not spread out. And that is consistent with research that was done on counting your blessings, specifically keeping a gratitude journal, writing down what you're thankful for. That was likewise more effective once a week than every day. And researchers believe that it's helping avoid adaptation. It's helping you keep off of that treadmill, that hedonic treadmill. Okay? In a separate video, we will do some practice examples so we can continue to review these concepts. But in the next video, we'll talk about correlation.